Jeff Ulbrich's evolution as a coach is going to boost Ian Cunningham's ability to build in the trenches.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in all of the galaxy. If you don't know me, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black. I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's episode, of course, I am joined by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, as I often am, to wrap up the weekend. It's been a busy week for the Atlanta Falcons. They've had press conferences. We'll talk about sort of Jarvis's biggest takeaways from the 3 coordinators that introduced themselves to the local media or reintroduced themselves on Wednesday. Falcons had a bit of a scandal over the weekend, right? Instead of playing in the biggest game of the season, one of their players decided to do something that was terrible, allegedly, and we'll get Jarvis's thoughts on that, and then we'll talk about the biggest game of the season and if Jarvis has any major takeaways from the Seattle Seahawks win over the New England Patriots. But Jarvis, let's jump into something that is less controversial, which is the Falcons coordinators talking. Jeff Ulbrich talking about players versus scheme, and Tommy Rees talking about under center and running the football, and Craig Ackerman talking about special teams not sucking, again. But maybe that's not a fair summary of what, you heard as you were on hand for these press conferences down in Flowery Branch. But I'm curious, sort of, what were some of your biggest takeaways listening to these 2 new coordinators and 1 old coordinator speaking to the media?
Well, for me, the one that sticks out to me the most is it definitely has to be Jeff Ulbrich. And when he was talking about how he went from being this hardcore, uber focused in on what a player should look like versus what a player kind of player a player not, right? And he gave an example of Michael Parsons and how when he was with the Jets, and that's when he said he started to make that transition from going to what a player should look like and whether or not a player can play or not. And he looked at Michael Parsons and said, nope, that guy doesn't fit my scheme. We'll move on. And he even said this himself, he said, when you look back at that and look at the results of what Michael Parsons has done, being one of the most disruptive players in the NFL behind Myles Garrett, you sit up here and say, like, okay, what was I thinking? And I think that when you have a guy like that being that honest, and don't get it twisted, Jeff Ulbrich wasn't the only person thinking like that. There are a lot of coaches who think like that don't have that open mind as to, like, okay, he doesn't necessarily look like what I normally would try to draft or attain, but the motherfucker can play some football. So let me see how I can get him into my stuff and just maximize what he does well and figure it out from there. And I think that's one of those instances where you look at it and you say, like, this is a guy that is still in a phase where, even though he has a lot of experience calling plays, working in the NFL, and has coached for a very long time, and he has experience playing the game, he's still open-minded enough to say, okay, I can still learn something. I can still evolve as a coach. And that was probably one of the more fascinating, press conferences I've been a part of, just sitting here and just listening to him just kind of break this thing down, like, because most people won't admit that on the record, right? Because it's just like, that's almost like a personal kind of thing that you say, okay, here's where I grew as a coach. When it comes to marrying or having a good relationship, so to speak, between player and coach, playing how I'm going to be successful and get paid, I feel like it's a lot. It's all about the coach now, I feel. And that's what I got from Jeff, is that you have to, you have a certain level of talent. If you are a talent that exceeds measurables, that exceeds, certain speed, that exceeds, knack for the game, be able to find the football and all that stuff, you have to figure out a way to make that player fit what you're doing, right? And that is with Micah. It was just a matter of get him on the field and just let him go, let him cook, like you said. So I think that, that is going to be very interesting coming into this year with Ian Cunningham, new regime, the whole James Pearce situation. We're going to talk about it a little bit later on, but I think that they're going to find out really quickly how much that's going to benefit them, that you have a DC that is thinking like that is outwardly saying, hey, this is where I am right now in my scheme and what I'm trying to run. And this is how we're going to continue to grow and build off of what we did last year.
Yeah. So last year, the Falcons had a lot of success rushing the quarterback. And a big part of that success was James Pearce. And the question, of course, is are they going to have James Pearce this season? But Jarvis, since that news broke on Saturday after we chatted on Thursday of last week, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. And we'll get into all of that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, we know that hiring isn't easy, but if you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. All you got to do is head on over to today's sponsor, Indeed Sponsored Jobs, and they're going to help you find the right match. They're going to help you avoid that person that looks good on paper but isn't quite the right fit. So stop struggling to get your job post seen on other websites. Indeed Sponsored Jobs is going to put your posts on the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. According to Indeed's data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results by using Indeed Sponsored Jobs. You can get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job that premium placement that it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. So before we continue today's Locked On Falcons, I want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. You are the reason why Locked On is the #1 sports podcast network in all of the galaxy. And of course, you can level up by joining the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below, LockedOnFalcons.supercast.com. Just for $5 a month or $50 a year, you get tons of perks. Ad-free version of the podcast, some Locked On merch, but more importantly, you get that Locked On Podcast Network Discord access where you can talk Falcons with other Falcons everydayers. You can talk trash to Saints everydayers, right? They have a lot of channels devoted to different divisions, trash talk, draft, other sports, all that sort of stuff. So if you just want another place where you can, engage in some great football content and conversations with some other everydayers, go check out the link in the description below. So, Jarvis, let's talk about James Pearce. Obviously, dealing with some heinous domestic violence, battery, as well as some traffic citations from some events that went down in Miami on Saturday, where he was alleged to have stalked his former girlfriend, WNBA player Rickea Jackson. And then was involved with an altercation, was ultimately arrested. The Falcons have been, as I thought they would be, basically being like, we'll let the legal situation play itself out. Because as I discussed on the podcast on Sunday, if this had been, no offense to Khalid Kareem or anything like that, but like if this had been Khalid Kareem that was involved in this, he would have been cut the next day.
Sure.
It's James Pearce.
Fair statement.
The Falcons are like, well, let's see how this all plays out. That's just how it kind of works. And, So my thoughts initially hearing the news was just like, I think there was an immediate reaction, understandably, that like, oh, his career's done. And it may wind up turning out that way.
Mm-hmm.
But because of how talented he is, the NFL always seems to find a way to allow those guys to continue to play football. Whether you think they deserve that opportunity or not is up to the individual. But I'm just curious, Jarvis, when the news dropped on Saturday, what were your thoughts? And now that we're a little more than 5 days later, have those thoughts evolved or changed since then?
Well, my initial thoughts was, how do we get here, right? Because I started going back through my mind with the NFL draft, where there was so much communication between Ra, Terry, Mom, JPJ. All of those conversations leading up to the draft, being able to sit with him and him working out for them and all, it was just so many things that it felt like that JPJ was committed to trying to prove that, hey man, y'all need to take a chance on me. Or the mom was saying, hey, y'all need to take a chance on my son. You can trust that he's going to do the right thing. You know he's going to do the right thing. And then you fast forward to where we are now, also taking into consideration during all that time, outsiders, right? Trouble, issues, teammates, high school teammate talking crazy about him. Like, hey man, something wrong with this dude. He a little off. You got little issues. He needs to figure out if he wants to play ball or not. If he does, he can be a force. All these things are going through my mind. And then now I'm sitting at a point where, and I ask myself, should I be surprised that this happened? And I think I've come to the conclusion, Free, that I'm not surprised. And that's not me just throwing him away saying, oh yeah, he a criminal, whatever. It's just saying that there were signs that this could potentially happen, right? Not this exact type of thing, but something of this ilk could happen. He was a risk. They took a risk, and now you're sitting here looking at, okay, all right, we're in wait see mode. Like now it's out of their hands, out of their control. It's in the legal system now. And then once the legal system get it situated, then it's in the league's hand. So that's what teams try to avoid. Bringing a player in that's going to put them in situations where they have no control over and the player has no control over. And then, you talk about the victim, Rakia Jackson, they've been dating for 3 years. And she's now willing to, y'all need me to testify? I'm ready and willing. If this thing go to trial, I'm right here waiting for y'all. Yep. And then also, Florida has a law that states that if they have to come to her if they try to work out a plea bargain. And she, from my understanding, that she has to approve that. So I don't think that, the Falcons thought they would be here, but they shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. And, I think that last point that you bring up, this is a new regime. Yep. They didn't draft James Pearce.
Yep.
Right. And you talk about the work that Raheem and Terry did. And I just remember when we were talking about it on the pods back in the spring, and people were like, why are you talking about it? Like, the character is not an issue. And I'm like, Raheem and Terry are telling you that character is an issue. The fact that they felt, and they've been very public, basically saying we had to do all the legwork, and basically them saying we did the homework. We got this, right? Whether whether you buy into the whole notion of we got this, and again, certainly there could be a conversation to be had that for all we know, James Pearce did all the right things when those two individuals were in the building, and the minute they leave the building, a month later, it's like all hell breaks loose. But who knows how much that plays a part in it. But it was just one of those things where it's like, where there is smoke, there is fire. And so this goes to a conversation I know you and I have had multiple times, not just with James Pearce, but with other prospects that have been on the Falcons radar, whether we talk about Mike Green and Jalen Carter. And basically, I've always been on the side of like, I understand that these players are all very talented, but in the National Football League, these billion-dollar industries and these corporations, they don't want to be embarrassed. Really, it's a bottom line thing. And when you start doing stuff like this, you become a liability, right? Because not only just from the team standpoint, from the coaching standpoint, from the player standpoint, where it's just like, I don't know if I can count on you. And we always say availability is the best ability. And that's always in relation to injuries, right?
Yeah.
But this is also part of it where it's just like, I don't know if you're going to be available. And even if the legal situation and the league and whatnot rules in a favorable way that allows James Pearce to continue to play football, the Falcons as an organization, whoever's coaching the Falcons, whether it's Kevin Stefanski, Jeff Ulbrich, or somebody else in the future, always has to look at James Pearce, frankly, in the same way that we look at someone like a Troy Anderson, where it's just like, are you going to be here on Sunday? Because I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're here on Sunday and you're going to play, great, awesome. We appreciate you, right? But I can't trust you to be available at any given point from this point on. That's basically the bottom line. And that to me, again, that's the football aspect. Obviously, it's much more serious when it comes to the off the field aspect of it. But like, that's kind of the situation that I think the team is in right now.
Yeah. And it's truly an unfortunate situation because, you know, I think back to that press conference when Jeff Ulbrich was asked about, you know, James Pearce situation, and he was so short. Oh my gosh, man. Like, you talking about someone that poured into JPJ. He lauded this man from the first day he got in, spring training camp. Like, he talked about the explosiveness. He talked about him coming along and developing and finally understanding what he needs to do on a weekly basis to be able to have success on Sundays. And his answer just really, I felt like it was short to the point. It was one word: disappointed. And I think that if JPJ saw that and really felt that Jeff Ulbrich gave him all he had as far as from a coaching standpoint, like, hey, man, and he appreciated that, I'm sure he really felt that. He felt that because he should have felt that. Because, you know, there's one thing for the general manager to take a chance on you and head coach and all that stuff, but you sit in that meeting room with Ulbrich all the time. Like, he has his hands on you on a daily basis. Like, there is interaction going on consistently. And I think that is one of those instances where you have to understand that it's going to be hard to build that trust back up if it works out in your favor. Because you can't assume that you're going to do what you're supposed to do because you had opportunity to. There were so many moments where JPJ could have just been like, all right, I give up. When he was at that light, allegedly, yes. When he was at that light and he got out, tried to get in that young woman's car, when she tried to pull off and he ended up trying to ram her into thing. When the police came, they were there. They had guns drawn, allegedly. And you still decide to get in your car and ride out? Oh, when you crash the car, you still try to get out, allegedly. So it was just bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And at not any moment, you didn't stop yourself, your brain from running and saying, hey, I might need to get myself up before it goes too far. It's just, yeah, man. So, yeah, disappointed. I really felt that when Ulbrich said that, because he said it with a stone cold face and moved on to the next question. Disappointed.
Yeah. So we'll see what's next for James Pearce. But a big game happened on Sunday. We haven't talked to Jarvis really about that. And everybody this week gives their takeaways. Like, what did you learn from watching the Super Bowl? And we'll obviously put a Falcons spin on it. So let's do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. And since the winter games are here, if you're anything like me, you're completely locked into all of the events. And, it's something that you only get to see once every 4 years. And it's why you should be following the winter games on FanDuel. They're going to allow you to stay connected with all the action. They're going to allow you to be fully locked into every competition, whether it's curling, speed skating, hockey, two-man, two-woman luge. I've seen it all. And when you're like me, you may not know the first thing about these sports, but they become a little bit interesting when you check it out at FanDuel. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com, whether you're rooting for your home country or you just love a good underdog story. FanDuel is going to keep that entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. So with the winter games being on, there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. So Jarvis, as I said, one of the big talking points that happens, in the weeks following the Super Bowl is, the lessons learned and the Seahawks blueprint to success, whoever winds up winning the game. And it's like, this is the new thing that's going to take the lead by storm for the next 12 months. And then another team is going to win the Super Bowl. And then it's going to be a different blueprint. But, usually there's commonalities between Super Bowl teams, generally speaking, but year to year. But I'm curious, when you were watching the game on Sunday, what was kind of your big takeaway? To me, and I talked about this after the game, was like, hey, you hear Ian Cunningham talking about building in the trenches. You see Seattle controlling the game in the trenches, and it's like, hey, man, that seems, I've never heard it before, Jarvis. Like, the game is won and lost in the trenches. Like, that's not a statement I've ever heard before in my life. That's something that I believe Ian Cunningham invented on 2 weeks ago and whatnot. So I'm just curious.
That's the
concept. I'm just curious. When you were watching the game, what did you notice? Anything that stood out to you, and anything that you're like, I'm going to take that. And let's bring that here to Atlanta and borrow that from Seattle.
Yeah, man. Obviously the defensive line, the draft picks, the guys that they got in free agency, it just all came together. John Snyder understanding how important it is to build from the inside out. That concept that's so new, no one has ever thought of it before.
Mm-hmm.
It just came around because all that matters in today's game is just all you got to do is get the quarterback and you're good to go. Nothing else matters. So for this Super Bowl to put that on display, I'm just like, man, this new concept about building football teams, I am so ready for teams to just dive into it and try to figure it out, because it's a new concept.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever thought of it before, and it's just fresh. And I can't wait until guys like Mike McDonald and just continues to teach us and learn us a little something, like the old folks used to say. Learn us a little something about how you can win football games if you build through the trenches. So that's kind of where I am, man. Like, this is so new and so fresh and so just, I'm naive to the fact that you can build teams through the trenches. Like, it's so new, and I'm just ready to learn and take notes, man. I can't wait. I can't wait until Jeff Ulbrich comes to the podium and says, guys, we need to get a dominating defensive tackle that can split double teams and get us some TFLs and push the middle of the pocket, because quarterbacks get uncomfortable when there's pressure up the middle.
Mm-hmm.
They can see the guys on the outside, right? But quarterbacks act a little funny. They get a funny feeling in their stomach when that pressure comes from right up the middle. So all this stuff, I'm ready to learn, man. I'm ready to learn, Free. I'm ready to learn.
So obviously you guys can tell what we're putting down. We're being very sarcastic because it's basically like this lesson gets taught every year, but we act like, oh, it's this time, maybe it'll sink in. It's not like the Philadelphia Eagles had like the best offensive line and D line in football. It's not like the Kansas City Chiefs went from a team that got absolutely destroyed by the Buccaneers on the line of scrimmage, and then basically like, you know what? This Joe Tooney guy and all these other pieces, Trey Smith, let's beef up, and then let's give Chris Jones a little bit more help on the defensive line, and it's like a winning formula. It just keeps happening over and over and over again. And to the Falcons' credit, like normally I would be on the podcast, me, Jarvis. I'd be like, well, the Falcons don't do this, and they have gotten better at this. It's taken them a long time.
Yes,
taken longer than we wanted.
Yes,
right? I remember the first draft show we did back in 2022. It was like, why are we drafting a wide receiver, Drake London? There's so many pass rushers available at the top of this draft. Why didn't we get one of those guys? No, to Drake London's credit, Drake London has done everything in his power to be like, I heard what you said, guys, and I took that personally, and I'm going to prove it to you every single Sunday. But it's been a slow process for the Falcons. They are light years better in the trenches today than they were when we first did that show back in 2022. And that was a point of emphasis that Arthur Smith brought into. Hate on Arthur Smith all you want, but he definitely was a believer in we got to win in the trenches. And they've made lots of progress. They need to continue to make that progress. And hopefully having Ian Cunningham in the building, former offensive lineman, understands the value of having those trench players. They will continue to make that progress. And we will continue to see this team to get to a point where we can sit there and say, yes, we have that type of dominant offensive and defensive line, so that if and when the Falcons are playing in those meaningful games in January, hopefully one day soon in February, we will be able to sit here and go like, yes, we're going to be able to go in and kick the butt of whatever team we're facing because we can control the game in the trenches. So I'm hoping that the Falcons can continue that progress, but I'm curious what your thoughts on that.
Man, I'm looking forward to the day where the Falcons, of course, it's not going to be this year because they have no first round pick, 26. I'm looking forward to the day in 2027 where Roger Goodell comes to that podium and he announces some random offensive lineman from Iowa, and who's an absolute mauler. And Falcons fans are just quiet. They're just quiet. I'm just like, yeah, get used to that. I want to get used to the non-sexy picks. Just start drafting some big old ugly mofos that can just push you off the ball, or some guys that can just push the offensive lineman into the quarterback and just still be pushing them. And then grab him with the other hand and bring down the offensive lineman and the quarterback. That's the type of stuff I want to see on Sunday. So, yeah, I feel like Ian Cunningham has the right mindset. Now that Mike McDonald and John Schneider have introduced this new concept in how they're supposed to build football teams, I feel like Ian can learn a lot from Mr. Schneider, because I'm going to call him Mr. because when you come up with new stuff that no one has ever seen before, you know what I'm saying? Like, you deserve to be called Mr. So, yeah, hopefully Mr. Schneider and can learn Ian a little something when it comes to how to build football teams. But I'm looking forward to that day where people will be like, what's going on? Why are we drafting the offensive lineman in the first round? Yeah, I can't wait till those questions come. That's the day I'm looking forward to. And I think it's going to start with, in the next couple of weeks, right? When you talk about, are they going to use the franchise tag? I think we're going to learn so much as these dates start to come up are upon us with far the calendar year for the league getting ready to crank up in probably about a month or so from now. We know we're going to be talking about this ad nauseum because like the draft is something that I get really excited about, and I know you do as well. And we've had a lot of shows talking about different players and different prospects and guys that we like, guys that we don't like, and we're going to figure out what the plan is going to be once free agency starts. Because if you don't address XYZ position, that means they're going to take a look at it in the draft. They want to go young, right? If the Falcons decide to draft re-sign Caden Ellis, might not see no linebacker get taken in the draft, or vice versa. If they don't sign Caden, they might be taking a look at a linebacker in the draft. So this is going to be one of those instances where we kind of get a feel, get a vibe for what type of general manager he's going to be. Because you can say one thing, you can say you're in the trenches and all that stuff, and I fall in love with all that stuff. I'm talking about myself here, but if you don't do that with your actions, you're gonna back him up with your actions. Questions gonna come in, and let's just go back to 2021 and that first draft, and everybody start looking at highlights from Florida and getting all excited, and next thing you know, that pick came around for the Atlanta Falcons, and the Atlanta Falcons pick Kyle Pitts, tight end out of Florida, and the crowd went wild. All the Falcons fans, they cut to him. Woo! Yeah! Let's go! Unicorn! It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. Ah! And we're sitting here in 2026. I don't know if they're going to keep him or not. So, yeah, man. Can't wait until they get this thing gets rolling and we start seeing the prospects, combine, all that good stuff. We're going to hear about Falcons talk to this guy. They're going to talk to everybody, So, don't read too much into it, but I think that when it boils down to what type of general manager Ian Cunningham is going to be, I understand what he said, but man, if he put actions to those words, whew, man, it's going to be some good foundation building down here in Atlanta.
We'll see. So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Appreciate you for tuning in. We'll be back with more. Probably talking more Micah Parsons and more about the Super Bowl and Will Campbell. So that will be your next episode of Locked On Falcons. So continue to make us your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as check out Locked On NFL to get the latest on all things going around the NFL. And of course, check out the Everyday Club in the link in the description below. Just $5 a month or $50 a year, and you get so many perks at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.